Awesome. Good. Well, Trace, it's amazing to have you on. Do you want to give like just anyone that hasn't seen you or heard you at all, like, do you want to give an overview of who you are and what you're about, what you're doing?
Yeah. I'm Trace Bell. I'm 22 years old from Los Angeles, California. I just started my teaching series called Saturday School with my dad, Rob Bell. That's signups for that are on his website, robbell.com. And then I just started my site, tracebell.com, and it's Bell with three L's. So TRACEBELLL.com. And we are doing a teaching series about the nature of consciousness, spirituality. We're doing a year-long teaching series called Saturday School. So it's all about the first episode was all called Introduction to Awareness. So it's all about consciousness, and it's all about these questions that I had as a young kid. And it's really fun. It's my dad and I teaching, and we're sort of bouncing off each other, and we're exploring the nature of awareness and what it means to be aware, and its connections with spirituality.
Just these really light surface area kind of topics, the nature of
Yeah,
consciousness and
just
and
some
just
just
awareness and existence as a whole.
exactly just shooting the shit on Zoom. Um,
That's
so
hilarious.
I am right now starting. I graduated from UCLA last year. And I'm beginning to start my career as I guess you'd call it like a teacher. But teaching and helping people, and I'm doing discussion groups based on the material throughout the week. I'm working one-on-one with people. Those are all signups, by the way, for all those are on my site.
Sure.
So
We'll make sure links to all those. Don't
yeah,
panic if
sweet.
you're listening or watching this. The links will be below or
Sweet.
on your phone or whatever. But yeah.
Yep. So I'm beginning I'm sort of my dad jokes that I'm just went to the family business.
Right.
He's a spiritual teacher and a spiritual author, so I'm just sort of going to the family business and sort of providing my perspective and sort of helping people and teaching people. So I'm having a blast,
Yeah.
and then I get to meet wonderful people like you and have conversations like this. So it's just like, I mean, it's such a great life, like talking about
Absolutely.
talking about what inspires me and what gets me excited.
Yeah, there's nothing better. Dude, there is nothing better than just loving what you do and getting pumped and excited and talking
Yeah,
to people that are interested in the same things. Like, honestly, I say all the time, like, I got a podcast so I get to have the conversations I want to have. I don't even care if people listen or if they like what they listen to. I'm having a good conversation.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that's awesome, man. Really awesome. So talk to me about that. Like, I'm fascinated by this because I listened to the series that you and your dad did. It was called Me, We, Everybody, and it kind of was a broad stroke overview of spiral dynamics, and at the same time, it kind of went into a lot of the weeds and looked at kind of different nuances of it, and it was a beautiful, really, really well done because it's a very complex and far-reaching developmental model, really, and you kind of touched on a few different components of different developmental models as well within that.
Hmm.
But I just thought it was a brilliant thing you did. But I was so struck. You said you're 22, right?
Yeah.
That was the thing that struck me the most. Is it was just so exciting to hear kind of integral thought and kind of integral perspective for someone that's so young. Because most of the people out there that you think of as particularly like yellow thought leaders or even turquoise, these kind of people, most of them, they've got a fair old beard and they're like, hobbling around and, like, I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
thinking like Sadhguru or Muji or someone, but they're just like, yeah, and then there's Trace Bell in the mix, and I'm like, that's awesome, that's cool. So talk to me about that. Like, we talked just a little bit in the preamble before we started, but I'm really intrigued. What was it like growing up as you, and how do you see your development personally as growing up through those stages of the spiral? Like,
That's a really good question. By the way, I'm honored that you view me as a yellow thought leader, whatever you said. That company that I'm in is just tremendous. I'm just like, wow. Uh, but no, I mean, for sure, a lot of it is attributed just the center of gravity in which I grew up in was the center of gravity is in like where my parents at and where the sort of environment I grew up, where it was on the spiral. So how evolved the sort of environment I was. So it's like, so many people I talk to that are sort of further know the spiral and further up maybe grew up in sort of orange and green environments, but they weren't even growing up
sure.
in environments that were aware of the spiral. Like I was in elementary school and a middle school student, my dad was learning the spiral and knew the spiral at that point. So I was growing up in a family where my dad was using the spiral and knew the spiral in a way that he was then teaching to a church and sort of understanding how to talk to people and sort of move them through the stages. So I mean, a lot of it I just attribute to just my family and where I grew up was just like, center of gravity was much higher. And not only was the center of gravity higher, I was also grew up around people that knew the model and were using the model in a practical way to like move consciousness in their work, you know? So it's like, so a large part of it's just my family. And I just think I just moved through those stages. Like I remember my parents saying like they saw me going through some of those stages like way earlier than most kids went through them. So it was like I was just growing out of stages faster than most people did. And a large part of that is the I was really into reading as a kid. So, I mean, reading was really helpful. I went to good schools. So, I mean, so school was helpful. And just having that sort of environment that I grew up in which it was just like fostering creativity, fostering growth, encouraging learning. And then my dad taught me the model when I was 21. And it just like clicked into so many, it just clicked so much stuff into place for me. Because I had heard them talk about it before. Like I had grown up with my parents sort of talking about the stages, but I still didn't really like know what the colors meant. Like I heard them be like, oh, that's just a meme green. They're just being like really hardcore green. And I'd be like, what does that mean? Like, and then he explained, it's like funny when I was 21, he explained he sat down and I still have the paper that he explained it on. Cause it's just like it's an iconic, he just drew it in like Sharpie. And it's just, I have it framed on my wall cause it's awesome. But he just sat down and explained to me and it just like clicked into place so many things. Cause it wasn't that I could just was like, oh, I'm here on the spiral. It was that I could see myself I could go back and trace my history and see how I had to like see the times in which I had moved through stages and seen all them. And the big point, and this is what I stressed on the Me, We, Everybody series, was that I could see all of them existing within myself at the same at once. And I could see how throughout my life, I sort of like in different situations, like moved through them and they all existed within me rather than just being like, oh, I'm here at this stage. And like, I'm way more advanced than everyone else. It was more just like, oh, here, I think my center of gravity is here, but they're all existing within me at once. And it totally it helped me just understand the model in a new way. And it helped me not sort of demonize or place people as like inferior because they're down here or not as advanced. It was just like, well, in certain environments, that stage comes out in me, like it's all existing within us.
Absolutely.
It's fluid. The fluid nature of the spiral really helped.
Yeah, I think, and that's so important because a lot of people that listen, it's really hard for us not to dive into kind of a hierarchical thought. And it is hierarchical. This is how things grow and develop, and that is a hierarchy, but it's not a hierarchy in the sense of higher up is better intrinsically. It might be better in a certain context, for sure, but it's not necessarily better. A toddler isn't worse than a university student. But if you are a toddler, it would be much better to teach the toddlers material to them and the university students material to the university student. And there's probably a whole bunch of different teachings in between that you want to work through bit by bit by bit to get there. But at the same time, the university student might fall back on really basic principles that they learned when they were 10. It's not that has left them. They need the whole process of growing up. They're going to pull from that and use a great example. Someone comes in the room and shoots a gun in the air. You could be, green, but you're quickly diving down to beige. Like, how do I survive the next 10 seconds? Purple, you quickly say a prayer to a God you don't believe and hope that magically you're saved. Red, you think, could I take this guy if I need to? Or could I put someone in front of me if I need to? Blue, you're thinking where are the cops? How did this happen? We need rules. We need, systems in place to stop this happening again. Orange, you're already thinking about the bestseller book you write about how you survived a gun, school shooting or something. Green is already thinking we need to change legislation, blah, blah, blah. But in that moment with the guy with the gun, you aren't getting up to green. You're not thinking about legislation. You're not thinking about systemic issues that cause gun control or problems. Or you are literally right there in the beige. Maybe you're getting up towards red. Maybe you'll get to blue and think maybe we should call the police here and see if we can get someone to come in and save us. But you're not getting to those later stages because you don't have the luxury of doing
Yeah.
that at that time. And so and that's a good thing, right? It could be a really good thing to have someone red in that room and use their red to tackle that gunman to the ground and, you know, hold him down until someone came to deal with it. Like, that's a really good
Yeah.
red right now.
Yeah.
Thank God for red kind of moment.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, these stages are all good. They're all within us, but they're not all within us all the way up. We do have a point where we've kind of like tapped out as our growth, in the same way that if you're 70, you might have all those experiences from 0 to 70. But if you're 30, you have the experiences of 0 to 30. You don't have 30 through 70. You're still growing up. And so I guess I just wanted to throw that in because that's such a stickler for a lot of people that they go, well, I just want to be, especially if you're orange, right? You just want to succeed. So, well, tell me which is the highest color, highest point, and I'll just work to get there.
Yeah.
That's not really necessarily going to serve you. So yeah, I just wanted to throw in. And I guess, so that, jumping off what you're saying there, after my ramble, your dad talked about my rambles. God, I take like
I love
an
your
hour
ramble.
to ask a question.
That was the gunshots analogy was perfect to show that I've never heard that before. Hearing all the stages, how all the stages would react to.
That's you guys brought up the gunshot and you brought up rage, and I was like, gosh, that's a great analogy. And from there, that's what I started thinking.
Well, you
like,
just took the analogy to a next level. You just took the analogy to a.
There you go.
I love it.
But you know, I'm thinking you seem to have grown up in a very fortunate situation, you know, and I think in a lot of ways, growing up through the spiral is a privilege.
Yeah,
it really
for
is.
Sure.
You know, if you are living in a state of being where you're literally looking for your next meal and you're beige and you're going, I don't know if I'm going to get through the next day. You know, you're going to struggle to get beyond kind of, you know, beige, purple, reds. Maybe if you're lucky, you're getting to it. But by blue, your general kind of needs are taken care of and you can start to build society and things. But like to keep moving beyond those, there's a lot of needs that kind of, and privilege. And you talk about that, you know, you went to a good school, you had parents that understood the spiral. And I wonder, looking back, do you see, I'm so intrigued by growing up with parents that understand this, because me and my wife talk about this a lot. We don't have kids yet, but we talk a lot of like, ooh, it's probably really unhealthy to try and force a kid that's at stage purple to kind of adopt green practices, you know, or whatever. I want to help that kid get all its purple out and fulfill, because you really need to fulfill that level before you healthily transcend it. If you transcend it before, you can do that, but you're going to have some shadow work to do, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder, looking back, do you see an intentionality in the way you were brought up that helped you grow up? Do you see your parents, or have you talked to your parents about this at all? Of like, did you kind of intentionally help me through the spiral? Because I think that's a fascinating concept.
Yeah, you know, it's this really fascinating concept, and I think the important point here is just because someone knows a spiral does not necessarily mean they're living it. So even though when I say I was very privileged because my parents knew it, but that does not mean that they were like fully living yellow sort of integrated.
Right.
Like they
have spiral wizards for mom and dad.
Exactly. Just because that's a little bit of a trap with spiral dynamics. It's just because you can intellectually know it does not mean you're fully embodying the sort of stages. And not that they weren't like way lower. They just weren't. They maybe hadn't sort of fully integrated like all the aspects, and they might have known the model. Sure. But no, and this shows me that they really did know the model, is that they didn't sort of they never talked to me explicitly about it, or never tried to like explicitly get me to a certain point, because they knew that I had to move through all the points on my own. So they were the big thing my parents knew was that we can't, like you said, you can't take a kid at purple and like force green on him, which would be like a very sort of, some parents would know the spiral, and that's sort of like an immature sort of approach to it, is like, we're gonna, like, we know the higher levels, so we're gonna sort of force those higher levels on our kid. But if you really understand the spiral, you know that the only way for it to work is if the person moves through it on their own. So my parents, the biggest thing my parents did was just sort of that our home was just such a home that just encouraged curiosity and encouraged questions. Like, people are always super surprised that I didn't grow up religious, because they're like, wait, hold on, you didn't grow up religious? Like, your dad was a pastor at a mega church, and he was like a huge Christian author and Christian pastor. And it was like, yeah, but Christianity just was not that relevant in the household. Like, it never inspired me. It was never really interesting to me. Like, they never like forced. They never were like, hey, you have to be Christian. They never pushed it on me. They were just, hey, Chase is not really interested in Christianity. We're just gonna let him move through we're just going to let him move through the stages. You know, we're going to let him move through whatever inspires him. And there was no sort of like pressure to be a certain way or adopt certain values or principles, or it was just fully now providing guidance and support, but also just letting me sort of evolve on my own. And that was the huge thing, just letting me move through the stages my own, because that's the only way it'll actually work.
Yeah, it's so big, and it's something that I have to remind myself a lot. I think I came across the spiral when I was very orange still. Bit green, for sure. I was a lot of green actually as well. I think, but my orange side hated how much it was green, and then my green side hated how much I was orange. So I was like a split kind of personality at war with myself. But I think it was very hard for me at the time not to. I think orange often thinks it's yellow. Like you're saying, it's very easy to understand. And I think on some level that does start to open you up to yellow, just knowing this is a model. Like that's part of tier 2 consciousness, is just being aware that this is happening on some level. But it's a real danger to think you're at somewhere you're not. And it's an even bigger danger to think that you might know where other people are and that you can get them to somewhere else when you maybe don't necessarily understand this and embody it yourself. That can cause a lot of problems, I think, as well. It's really interesting to me that, so the people that generally are going to be listening to this and the people I work with, what they're going through is this kind of like radical shift in faith. Most of them grew up in real strong faith traditions, very blue, very conventional. They want safety, certainty, and security around an authority figure that has given them the absolute truth and they can live it, and they're guaranteed to heaven, they're guaranteed to avoid hell. They have community, all these different things. And then they are obviously going through some step into orange that causes them to start questioning that, doubt that, go after more autonomy. And in that is this loss of community. There's, a whole host of different, there's existential doubts and questions and crisis. And I guess one of the things I'm intrigued by in that is people are desperate to either race through this orange stage into green to reclaim this kind of community. And I wonder, do you have thoughts on, I guess, if you were going through this sort of process, if you were working with someone, I know you kind of work with people on an individual level, they're in this process, that they are orange, they're probably a little green as well. It's very hard to be in this movement without being exposed to green, especially in this day and age. I think if you start to become a bit more rational and a bit more open to data, a lot of the data points to very green issues and, and opens you up to that. But do you have thoughts on how to navigate that without rushing the process of orange? Because I think that's a big stage. I know you talked in the podcast, you said you felt like in some ways your orange stage was almost a blip. It was like a blink and it was over.
Like a couple months.
I know you were kind of joking, but like it can be that a lot of people kind of really plow through that orange stage. And I'm really intrigued by what you think about that.
I think you're totally, and it's funny you say this because I was actually thinking about this the other day, and you're totally nailing something. I think the way that culture is, because the center of gravity is so, and especially in the US and the UK as well, would be so sort of orange green. I almost feel like you're totally right about like people in orange are almost, it's like it's almost impossible to be like orange and not green. I almost feel like those stages almost getting sort of like blended together, almost, because I'm with you. I'm having a tougher time differentiating people from in orange and green. Like it seems to be like the way in the past there was a more of a differentiation, because it was almost like a cartoonish orange. The cartoonish like really like just defends materialist science and like Deepak Chopra, it's sort of woo-woo nonsense. Like, and then there's like the green sort of like cartoonish like hippie who's smoking weed. It's just like, hey, let's just want to meditate. And it's like, those were sort of in the past, it feels like those were easier to sort of differentiate. But now when you get in the orange and the rational, when you get in sort of the rational logical thinking, all of that's also pointing towards sort of green solutions. Like even like orange would, if someone in stage orange would be like, okay, let's look at the logic and facts, and they would be like, okay, meditation is a great thing. Meditation like just like statistically just improves your life, improves your thinking, improves your like daily overall sort of satisfaction in life. So while meditation might have been something in the past that maybe split orange and green, just through orange reasoning, it can like get to meditation and green. So I just think you're nailing something. It almost feels like the two stages are sort of becoming like a hybrid orange green. So I don't honestly with orange is a tough one because I didn't have a huge orange stage. And I remember when I was like 13, I was reading about the hard problem of consciousness, which is the idea that science can't come up with a theory for how neurons in your brain produce consciousness, because there's no way to deduce the inner richness of consciousness from the physical parameters of neurons. So so like materialist science says that once the brain gets complex enough, then it just magically sprouts consciousness. And I remember at like 13 being like, hold on a second. Like you're telling me this consciousness, this thing that's fascinated me my whole life. My whole life I've been fascinated with consciousness. You're telling me we're all walking around and science is telling us it comes from the brain, but they have no actual adequate theory for how consciousness comes from the brain. There's no actual evidence that physical. So I remember from like 13 being like, man, this whole orange sort of materialist science, like it just doesn't sit right with me. So I feel like orange, I feel like I don't know if I'm great. I don't know if I'm a great like person to talk about the orange, like the experience in the orange stage, because I just remember the orange stage always feeling a bit silly to me. The whole whole experience is just happening because of neurons in your brain and just explaining it like, oh, science can explain everything. From a young age, I was like, nah, this whole experience goes way deeper than just science explaining everything. So that whole sort of orange stage, I just feel like I just never really, like I went through it, but it felt like really quick because it just never really like, I feel like I saw the holes in it before I even sort of moved through it, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
I don't know if that answered the question, but
no, it's interesting. It's interesting. I'm intrigued by that. So, like, generally speaking, people like they dive into a stage, they live that stage. Now, of course, most people are a few different stages at once. And different components will reveal in different areas. Maybe in how you do your business life, how you see friends and family, and things might be slightly different and at different stages. So I think it's dangerous to kind of just go, that person's orange or I'm a green and whatever. But generally speaking, like you were talking about, we've got this kind of center of gravity and we do shift through them as we go. I'm intrigued by, generally speaking, we kind of embrace the stage we're at, we work through it, we kind of give it our all, we live that life. And it's only in doing that we start to hit its problems. And when we start hitting the problems, we start to move on. But one of the things I'm aware of is there's definitely stages that I've... looking back growing up, I either didn't, I hit the problems really early, and I don't think I really lived in those stages long enough to really get as much as I could have got out of them. And in time, the last couple of years, I've been trying to do some shadow work and kind of go, okay, where have I not actually fully got my red side? And I'm like, gosh, there's a lot of red I haven't got. And I felt this. I actually think I lived in orange forever. So I just like was born orange, like straight out, and was like, all right, hand me some books, I'll figure this out for you all, and I'll make millions while I do it. I never got there. But I'm intrigued when you look at that component. Do you see shadow work in your orange? Do you see a lack of orange in yourself? Or not that you don't have it, but that you haven't fully kind of like allowed that to flourish and grow?
That's interesting. I don't, I think that's a really good question. I don't feel like I repressed, I feel like I did move through my orange and I worked through it. I just feel like I also sort of knew the limitations of orange as I was going through it. So I don't feel like I don't feel as much shadow work with orange. Definitely red and blue for sure. I definitely had more sort of shadow work and going through. That's why I love sports. Sports teams are where I get my blue. Sports are inherently ridiculous. Like watching, like caring about who wins. Like it's literally like watching grown men play a game with balls. It's like it doesn't really mean anything, but like I have sports teams that I like watch and like root for because it's just like it's where I get my fix of blue, And definitely as I got older, I had to go back and sort of reclaim and work through some red. So it wasn't like I definitely felt like as I got older, I had a pretty intense green stage too. Like in high school, I like really went through green, so I didn't feel like I had shadow work as far as going back with green. I don't feel like orange though. Because I feel like the healthy orange, the like using rationality and using logic and sort of reason, I feel like I've always been really, really great with. Spirituality became so much like so much more of an exploration and so much more personal to me when I started to really sort of use a lot of those components of orange. So I started to really look into my experience using reason and logic and like, wait, hold on. Spirituality is not just like woo woo, airy fairy nonsense. I actually can like investigate spirituality, like quantum physics. Quantum physics is a classic example of using sort of orange and orange science to like, and then looking at the spiritual implications of that orange science. So it was like taking that, so the healthy aspects of orange and using it spiritually was like a huge, just took spirituality to like a new sort of level and really made it sort even more lived for me, because it was like, oh, spirituality is not just something that feels good. I can actually investigate it with this sort of orange, ruthless rationality and logic. And it's like it's like integrating all those aspects of this, of the spiral and including all the healthy aspects of them to really sort of grow spiritually.
I love that. I love that a lot. So, something else you were just saying, like about how orange and green are so intermingled today. I think, you know, both the US and the UK, and that really sums up most of the people listening to this, maybe some European as well, but on the whole, very Western, and on the whole, very orange and green as far as their center of gravity. I know that if you start stepping into more rural areas in America, that changes very quickly, but on the whole, that's what's going on. And one of the things I'm fascinated by is if we look at how people have, as societies, gone through these stages, you know, you look at beige, you're talking a long time ago, 100,000 plus years, you know, and you know, and bit by bit we start shifting into purple, but that's over the space of 50,000 years maybe, and then we start shifting into red, and that's over like maybe 10,000, and then blue, and that's maybe 5,000, and then, you know, we start moving into orange, and that's maybe about, you know, 3,500 years later, and then we move into green a few hundred years later, and then orange starts to emerge a few decades later. And what's interesting to me is, as we look at society only ever had to transition from one to the other. There only ever really was two developmental stages warring with each other in a society or in a mix of societies on the whole for the longest of times. And we've seen, like, you know, with a lot of what's happening right now throughout the world, with a lot of people pushing back against green, because it's very easy to win against green. All you have to do is go, who hates green? And the majority do, because blue and orange are a majority. So you look at someone like Trump, he didn't win because he got racists on his side or because of something else. He won because he was like, who hates green? Look at all these libtards, look at these stupid snowflakes. And everyone was like, yeah, we hate those too. And actually, it's actually not necessarily that easy to group in orange and blue in a lot of ways, right? If you ask them who agrees that the Bible says this, a lot of disagreement, right? And so one of the things that fascinates me, sorry, I'm trying to keep on point because I keep coming up with random things.
No, this is awesome.
One of the things that fascinates me is it's really interesting right now that we have this kind of, we've got orange, blue, and green coexisting. And I wonder if we see this kind of societies going through these stages faster and faster and them emerging faster and faster, I wonder, do you have thoughts on how people are growing through these stages? And do you think that there is potential for, as we go through the stages, we actually might be able to navigate the stages more quickly as we mature? Like, do you, I've never thought about this particularly, but I'm intrigued by what you think about that.
Yeah, I do. I think that there's sort of a mass. I think as the evolution happens quicker as we're the more we're on this planet, the evolution is happening quicker. So I think we're going to move through these stages quicker. And I think that this past year with COVID has really brought sort of almost, you can think about like a mass awakening in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people have sort of woken up to the fact that our systems and institutions haven't been working. And I think that the way we're treating the planet and the way the planet is failing us because of the way we treated it, I think it's almost like forcing us to grow. And I know, you only need a small percent of the population to enter into those higher stages where it completely shifts culture. So I think like it oftentimes seems like progress is really slow, and the progress happens like that. Like it's like really quick. Because people are like, well, it's all happening so slow. And then it's like, but you only need just this small amount of people, these influential sort of thought leaders, and then it'll totally shift culture. So we only need a little bit of the dominant, the green becoming sort of the dominant in culture really only happened in the 60s or the 70s maybe.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Yellow, we might not be that far off from yellow. I mean, just that, I forget if it's 5 or 10% of the population.
I've heard a lot of different numbers, but generally I hear 10% is the most common one. I don't know if it's
Okay.
accurate, but
So
I hear it thrown around more often.
Yeah, so I have no idea what the number of yellow is right now
Right.
in our countries, in our respective countries. But I mean, we only would need it could be sooner than we think. And
Yeah.
I think evolution is happening quicker, for sure.
I think it feels longer as well because there is a component where green has been the leading edge for 40 years plus, maybe. Certainly 40 years, maybe 50 years, maybe even a bit more. But what's interesting about green is and I know Wilbur talks about this, I know you guys talked about it a bit in your series, is it does have, I tried not to talk about this too much in my series because when I brought my series out, everyone was orange and I'm like, don't poo-poo green too much because no one's ever going to move on. But
this is green and unhealth. This is green and unhealth.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, but I think on the whole, green has kind of, gosh, it's failed itself tremendously in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think one of the failings of green is by default it doesn't lead very well. It struggles to be assertive and to go, hey, look, my way is the best way, because green wants to include all ways and it wants to be embracing and go, look, we're all great, we're all included, and look, all truths have a relative perspective, which of course it loses it fails to see that it's making an absolute truth about those relative truths and so on. But I think because of that we've really struggled to see orange lead, which in turn means it feels like this green lead, which means that it feels like orange has been leading forever. You know what I mean? Like, because when green has got power, it hasn't done anything. Yeah. And then it flips back to orange, who then seem to screw up everything and whatever, or worse, maybe blue or maybe red, as some people have seen. It feels like we're in this kind of deadlock right now that does need that leading edge to emerge, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think you're totally right, and I think that you mentioned Trump earlier, and I think Trump is like a perfect example of the way that green has just failed leading so much, because you have a guy like Trump come in and all he needs to just do is just shit on green all day long, and he just has people like flocking towards him. And I remember it was interesting in California, which is a very liberal state, a very green state in a lot of ways, like how many people I'd heard like, I just don't understand, how do people like Trump? And it's like, it's not that they like Trump. They like that Trump hates the people they hate. They like that Trump pisses off the people that they hate. So all Trump has to, green is like so obnoxious and has done such a poor job in leading, that you just have a guy like a total buffoon like Trump come in, and he just has to point and just be like, aren't those people stupid? And he just has to rail against green, and he just gets like, he just gets people going crazy about him. And it's totally Green's total rejection of hierarchies makes them terrible leaders, because it makes them terrible at actually sort of making statements of like, no, this is the best, this is the way to do it, this is the way, sort of. It makes them poor leaders, because a leader actually has to embrace hierarchies and sort of include that in a healthy way, of course.
Do you think there's hope for healthy green emerging and leading, or do you think we just need yellow to come in and save everyone? Like, how do you see that playing out? Because it feels like some of green has woken up recently and started to go, hey, like, I know we're definitely not the fucked up ones. I get it. Like, this is messed up. That over there in blue and that over there in orange or whatever. Yeah. And obviously they don't use the language and the colors. They're not aware, maybe. But this feels like a lot of green people waking up and going, it feels like a lot of the people are voting the way they are just because they hate us. And maybe we could be a bit more likable. Maybe we could be a bit more assertive. Or we have kind of failed to like actually follow through on all these things we're shouting about. That seems to be a larger voice right now. Do you think that's the possibility of that becoming a loud enough voice and a strong enough leadership that green could kind of lead? Or do you think it's just really going to struggle to get there?
That's a really good question. I honestly don't know, because I when Trump got elected, I really hoped that people with green would sort of wake up and see the ways that they were. And I was happy to see that some of them did. I saw some people like, wait, hold on, let's take a look at ourselves. Let's take a look at the way that we're doing things, rather than just blaming all those stupid conservatives and those stupid people that don't get it. It was like, I saw some green people sort of waking up to the fact that, no, we actually have to improve. But your question about is, can green actually sort of wake up and figure out a way to do it, or do we just need to tip into yellow? I honestly don't know. My heart says that we need people to tip into yellow. That's what it feels like to me, because it feels like green has been the leading edge for a couple decades now. it feels to me like the spiral is getting popular enough, and it feels to me like the next decade the spiral will get much more mainstream, and it just feels like a matter of time here before it becomes like much more mainstream than it already is. Like the people I'm working with in my discussion groups, it's amazing how many people mention the spiral and are making connections to it's like amazing the amount of people I talk to now. It wasn't like this a year ago, like how many more people are referencing it. So it just feels like natural that green is just going to tip into yellow. And I just wonder if just the past 4 years of Trump were just like the sort of wake up call in a lot of ways of like, and this is why it's so, I read somewhere, like if you're at a stage, you really want to expose yourself to material of the higher, whatever the next highest stage. And it's like, this is why it's absolutely integral, no pun intended, for green to start reading yellow material, really exposing themselves to yellow and the framework, and really sort of figuring out, moving through that stage and tipping into yellow. Cause it feels to me like yellow is where real change will happen rather than just improving green. But I honestly don't know. That's a great question.
What are your big go-to yellow recommendations? People listen to this thinking, gosh, yeah, I'm pretty green. I'd love to be exposed to more yellow thought. Like what do you recommend as far as some like kind of go-to kind of resources and to check out, people on YouTube or books or whatever?
This won't surprise you, but Ken Wilber honestly is the main. I mean, Ken Wilber has been, I've learned so much from him, and his sort of his integral thinking is just like, he's second to none. He's the one that's wrote extensively on this. On YouTube. I wonder. I don't know if I know anyone doing on YouTube. But yeah, the series that my dad and I did is great. If you type in spiral dynamics on YouTube, you can those stuff will come up. I don't know any. I can't remember any specific ones I've seen that were really great, but there's not a ton of literature out there besides Ken's stuff on spiral dynamics. Like I think Don Beck has a book, but I don't think it's that great. I think I've read a little bit of it, but didn't really capture.
Yeah, it's hard to, like, it doesn't grab in the same way. It's an old book, right? And it's also more of a textbook, but Beck and Cohen's Spiral Dynamics book, and cool.
But Ken has a bunch of books, like real quick, Ken has a bunch of, like, he has a integral spirituality, integral, he has a couple books that are like integral titled, that are great. And then I assume you've read his post-truth in a Truth in a Post-Trump World, or
if you're green and you're like feeling like green is the best thing ever, read that, and you're gonna be like, you just have the shit beat out of you for 100 pages. It's good. It's helpful.
That's a great book to read, because it brings it also into the current climate and the current U.S. politics.
Contextualizes it.
Yeah, contextualizes it. So it's that was the first book I read that really exposed it to me, because it like brought it like it just brought it like right to like modern day. So you sort of understand it. It's not a long read too. So it's like a perfect introduction. So I'd recommend anyone that really wants, that's the perfect introduction to yellow and sort of the failures of green.
Sweet. Yeah. Awesome. Dude, let's talk about waking up and consciousness, because I know you're excited about it. I know that you guys are doing your Saturday school. I'm going to say, by the way, straight after this, I'm going to try and figure out, are people able to plug into Saturday school still? Is it open, or is it jump in?
It's whenever. There's 3 different dates. We have a date for the one in February, which we recorded it. So there's a recording of it.
So people can go back and kind of catch up as well.
Yeah. Because it's exactly. So it'll be like a whole video series. So it's not just live. And then we have the next one scheduled for March, and then we have the next one scheduled for April. So nice. I'd love for you to, I think it's good.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
But so let's dive into it, because like I know, and we'll maybe use some of Ken's language here, but there's the concept of waking up and growing up. And so what we're talking about when we're talking about spiral dynamics, we're talking about growing up through the stages. It's becomes part of who you are, and it becomes your center of gravity. It becomes like how you live your life in a sense. And you can be conscious of the different stages, and then there's the actual living in those different stages. But then there's the component of waking up, which is kind of a separate journey of becoming aware of your awareness, becoming aware of consciousness itself. And you maybe there's something behind or beyond or within. It's all. There's that thing going on. But what's interesting about it is you can have those experiences at any part of the spiral.
Yep.
And so it's really interesting that I think we're getting to stages in our growing up where waking up has this radical implication, because we actually have language for it. It feels
Yeah.
like, if you look back through like maybe Christian mystics or something, they had these amazing waking up experiences, and then they were like, guys, it's God and he wants us to do this, and if we don't do it, we just kill them. Or, and you're like,
Yeah.
that's probably not where I would have gone with that incredible experience or whatever. But can you talk about like what are you talking about when we talk about consciousness and about waking up? Because these are kind of conversations that most people aren't having. We don't seem to talk about consciousness and what it is to have consciousness very often. It's not something that comes up in our day to day usually.
Yeah. So consciousness. So like you said, like we were talking about the spiral, that was all growing up. Waking up I would categorize as experiences that really sort of wake you up to the nature of reality, the nature of who you are. So the big thing with the relationship between waking up and growing up is you're going to having sort of waking up experiences and awakening experiences. You're going to interpret them at the level of consciousness that you're at. So a person at stage blue who's very religious might have an awakening experience, and they're going to interpret that as to fit in their framework of a religious God. Right. So that's why Ken stresses that you grow up and wake up. Those are both equally important, because you want to grow up and work on the human and integrate all these aspects of you, so that when you have these waking up experiences, you can properly integrate them and properly understand them and properly fit them in. Because if you're at the sort of lower levels, you're not going to fully your level of development isn't at a place where you could fully understand that, fully integrate it.
Right.
So like I had most of my huge awakenings have been this past year after I learned the spiral. So I would say that my center of gravity was somewhere around yellow, and then I was hit with all these huge waking up experiences that sort of like gave me rather than just an intellectual understanding of the higher stages, it actually gave me a fully lived experience. And I was able to fully sort of understand it and work with it and sort of integrate it into my daily life, because I was already at a level in which it was able to be sort of understood, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that the when they say that spiral dynamics is like a model of consciousness evolution, I almost think that the higher stages in which it's awakening to oneness, I sort of think of the model as like, it's essentially the model is consciousness waking up to itself. Because once you get to the highest stages, those true awakening experiences it's not Trace having an awakening. It's essentially just consciousness, but like you said, awareness becoming aware of itself. So you think the model at those higher stages, it goes so transpersonal and so beyond the human that it's essentially awareness becoming aware of its own true nature. So it's consciousness. The higher stages are consciousness recognize itself. That's just a fun thing I like to think about. I love
it because it's I was reading something today by Claire Graves talking about tier 1, tier 2 and hypothetical tier 3, and just talking about these different stages. And I will say, people that have followed my spiral dynamics stuff, different spiral dynamics, even yours and Rob's stuff, most of those have just tiptoed into tier 1 and gone, here's what it looks like at the very early stages of tier 1. But the hypothetical or the theoretical component of tier 2 is that it follows along with tier 1. So actually yellow is tier 2 beige. It's a brand new awareness of a new existence. It's becoming aware of actually a whole nother level of like, oh wow, I'm not this. That whole first tier was me trying to wrestle with the material world and find my place and how the material world works. And suddenly in tier 2, I kind of wrap it up in that beige stage and I find a bit of a context. And then I start to move into turquoise, which would be purple, which would be like, gosh, this is pretty magical and it's pretty mysterious and I'm not sure I understand it, and I'm going to just give myself to kind of embrace this mystery and see what it looks like, and beyond, right? So you have coral and teal and all these other colors that are really at the end of the day pretty much hypothetical, right? Because we're talking such a small percentage of human beings that are even remotely going there that you can't even build a system around that, right? Because it's just so small. I mean, if turquoise is like 0.1% of the population of Earth, we think maybe. So who's coral, right? It's like 4 people, but I'm so intrigued by this because I think a lot of people that have followed your stuff and my stuff are probably going to be very quickly kind of, where are you going? This is very kind of like out there. but it
Yeah.
is very out there stuff. I know for me, I struggle to engage with this a lot. I remember someone I love is Leo Gura. He runs actualize.org,
Yeah,
and he's
yeah.
a really interesting guy.
I'm a big fan of his as well. Actually, I just remembered him after you asked the question about who's great on YouTube for Spiral Dynamics,
He's
and
a great person for
I was like,
spiral
who's it?
dynamics and
Leo? I was like
yellow.
Leo Guerrero. I was like, what's his name? I was like, yeah, Leo Guru. He's yeah,
Gura.
that guy knows
So
his stuff.
I remember he did a series on spiral dynamics turquoise, and I remember I working through the spiral, reading about it, looking at it, and going, "Gosh, yeah, it's amazing." And I remember hitting turquoise, and I hit play, and like I've never experienced ego backlash like it, like
Mm-hmm.
where honestly I tried to listen to it probably 30 times, and I never got more than like 10 minutes in because I was distracted. I would realize, oh, I've not listened at all, and I'm 30 minutes in, or I would like actively be like, oh, I'm not in the mood and switch it off. And my ego was just going, no, not wanting to go there. It was very, and I can only tell that like afterwards I was looking at it and I was like, gosh, I really was not wanting to engage with that. It was too scary for me. And so I say that just to frame as well. This is pretty existential work, actually, starting to move beyond yellow into turquoise. It requires some ego death. It requires
Yeah.
some pretty advanced spiritual concepts. Whether you believe in a god or anything, but when I say spiritual, I'm just meaning kind of like how we frame meaning in existence and
Oh,
the
absolutely.
kind of
Yeah.
meaning we give that. So I guess I'm intrigued by how did you step into exploring turquoise? Was it something that you were quite excited by, nervous by? Did you find those kind of like components of like a pushback from your ego of like, oh, Trace, do you really want to go here? Like, what was that like for you?
That's a great question. Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to figure out how to say this without sounding. I sort of got bored with just the being so mind identified. The yellow stage is great, but I felt like I described before I really started to explore spiritually and really started to have awakenings. I felt like had sort of reached the end of something. I went to UCLA, which is one of the best academic institutions in the country, and I remember just being bored out of my mind there. Like it just was so soulless and so sort of like lacking any sort of like heart. Like it was just so mind dominated and just so like that like classic academia where it's just like I just was so bored by it. And I remember leaving UCLA and being like, that can't be my life. Like I can't live like these people are living, where it's just like everything's so just like associated with the mind and just being so cognitive. And it was like it felt like there was something else sort of like pulling me. Felt like there was some thing tugging me to sort of like transcend. And I just was like, so the best way I can describe it is I just felt like I had reached the end almost of like because yellow is still very associated with the mind. It's still very cognitive. It's still very intellectual.
Absolutely.
And there was like just something pulling me to sort of go beyond the mind and sort of explore those questions that you've always had about consciousness, and explore that question about what is that awareness that's aware of Trace, explore that. So I felt like it was, there was just something pulling me to go beyond the ego. Cause you're right. When you get to these stages higher than yellow, you're talking about transcending the ego. And that comes, if you have a very entrenched ego, and if you're very identified with ego, that can get very scary, you know?
Absolutely.
So the amount it sort of exploring and going beyond just taught me so much about myself and taught me so much about transcending the ego. And it was also beautiful, but the best way I can describe it is that, I felt like I had sort of reached the end, and I was sort of almost getting bored with, I was like, there's a deeper layer of existence that I need to explore here. There's a deeper layer that's sort of calling me.
That's awesome. I love it. I know for me, I was just talking to one of my patrons. We have like a discussion group and we talk about spiral dynamics like 24/7. It's about all sorts of things, and that's all I ever talk about. But we were talking about it, and he was like, what are turquoise teachings? Can you find me people that are teaching turquoise so I can learn about it? And I was like, I'm so intrigued by even the language of that, because I'm like, I was trying to explain, I'm like, you'll find most people that are turquoise, they sum up what they teach in about 3 words. Like, if you're lucky, you'll get a sentence out of them. Like, they don't sit and teach extensively about turquoise. What they do is go, be here now. And then you go do it. That's it, right? I mean, you don't get to sit and read a book for too long. I know you can, but what really exposes you to this is doing it. And I think that was, for me, that was one of my barriers, was like, I want to meditate for 4 hours a day. I don't want to sit and contemplate awareness and just keep introspecting until I keep stepping back and wake up. Like, I like that. To me, I was just so yellow, orange, I don't know. It was very, very intellectual, very rational, where I was just like, oh, just give me books. Can I even just buy a bunch of books on Amazon and I'll feel like I've transcended? And for me, actually, what really got it, I think I maybe had tastes maybe when I was doing different meditation and contemplation exercises, but it was only when I actually took psychedelics that, for me, that blew my paradigm. Because, and people will notice, and I've heard it readily, but what psychedelics do is they basically kind of, and we don't fully understand how psychedelics work, but one of the things we do know is it kind of just messes with all the separateness of the different components of the brain, and it just kind of meshes them together. And what happens is the part of your brain that's responsible for identifying a self, that kind of puts everything together in the right way. You play a key on the piano, and actually you pressing it, you hearing it, and you seeing it all happen at 3 different times. But your brain makes it all the same time, because otherwise you would just start to fragment as an ego. Right? You need these things to work. And what psychedelics do is they just start jacking up all that stuff, and your ego does kind of dissolve into nothing. And it's very hard to articulate these kind of things that you experience, but you can't put words to it. I think that's one of the problems of turquoise, is it tries to articulate something that has to be experienced. And yet many people aren't able to step into that experience as easily. I know since then I've found it easier, if I am meditating, to try and step into that experience, because it's given me a framework of like, oh, this is what it looks like. This is how it should is the wrong words, but I guess I've got a map here of what's supposed to happen if I suddenly become awake and aware of my conscious existence or whatever. And I guess that's an intriguing. Do you have thoughts on how to navigate that and explore that? Because that's a hard thing for a lot of people, and maybe some people just aren't ready to do that as well. I think that's a big part. But stepping into that very experience, it's a big shift, because a lot of tier 2 is very academic. Even in green and blue can be very academic about how it goes about things. And yet, as we move away from yellow, tier 2 really steps into an experience of something that can only be experienced. It can't necessarily be articulated.
When you go, you brought up a bunch of great points. When you go past yellow and you get into that turquoise stage, you're really talking about sort of going beyond the mind, and going beyond the mind means going beyond language. So you're starting to get into stages that are going beyond language. So there's not going to be the same sort of language, and words aren't going to get you once you go beyond the mind, then you have to sort of leave language by the wayside in a way. And the big thing, I think, with yellow, like we've talked about, yellow is still very mind identified. It's still very cognitive, and that can be a bit of an addiction in a way, because the mind can get sort of addicted to thinking and addicted to having maps, models, and concepts. And it's can feel like a treacherous leap to try to leap into territory that goes beyond all that, and then you brought up a great point, and this is I talk about this with my discussion groups a lot. Because the teaching series my dad and I do, and it's all about awareness. So we're talking about something that goes beyond the mind, because it's that which is aware of the mind. So I'm helping people understand that, like, you sort of through words, you build a conceptual framework for all this stuff. But like Ken says, the conceptual framework or the map isn't the territory. You can study a map of Costa Rica all day long, but it's not actually like being on the beaches in Costa Rica. So
right.
It's an important balance, because I feel like there are some sort of spiritual sort of there's some spiritual sort of way of thinking in which it's like all maps and models and concepts are just a waste of time. Like, just be here now. And it's like, yeah, but all these maps and models do provide a sort of nice conceptual framework and conceptual foundation in which you then can like understand when you have transpersonal. It provides a very nice like foundation in which to build those on. But you also don't want to confuse these for the actual experience itself. Right. Like I always bring up the Zen koan about how spiritual teachings are like a finger pointing to the moon, and that the actual experience is like the moon, and all the teachings and language about it is like the finger. And the saying is like, don't confuse the finger for the moon. Don't confuse all the words pointing to the truth for the truth itself. But what I've been talking about in these groups and working with people is like, but also you just build the best finger possible, build the best pointer possible, like build it, and like you'll have that conceptual framework, which will then allow you to like then integrate the experience. But the actual sort of learning and the conceptual sort of building isn't the experience itself, and that's a very important distinction. So for yellow, it's all about sort of releasing that need to sort of understand everything with the mind and think about everything, and sort of releasing that sort of addiction to thinking about everything, and sort of to let go of that and let go of the ego to really explore those sort of deeper aspects. Yeah.
Which is, I mean, that's scary work. I mean, a lot of the people listening to this, they've gone through some really big existential crises as they've transitioned in faith, going from blue to orange and then orange to green. These are some big shifts. Maybe orange and green is hard to distinguish, but certainly that blue to orange, they did die to themselves. They lost their community. They lost their God. They lost their identity as a son or daughter of God, or however they framed their whole life was just gone in an instant. And so I guess the thought of signing up for another existential crisis, the thought of signing up for this horrendous ego death, I mean, and certainly in my experience of having these profound ego deaths, I would say all of them were the best experiences I've ever had. Of the top 5 spiritual experiences I've ever had, they were all linked to having kind of one of these waking up moments. And yet, in the moment, some of them were the most terrified I have ever been. And some of the most terrifying, because it literally was, oh my gosh, I don't exist. I'm an idea. I'm a dream. What if I don't wake up? There is no Phil. Like, that's just an idea that's happening. These atoms have got together and they're having an idea called Phil. And I'm attached to it. But that could be gone tomorrow. You could just let go and it wouldn't, who am I if I let go of Phil, And very, very existential work. And so, I just think it's really... I guess if people are listening to this is not, again, you have to fight that temptation of going, oh wait, so turquoise is the highest? I gotta become turquoise now? And that's not what we're saying here. Like, it's really important to be, to work on integrating where you are right now, and working through that stage to the best of your ability and growing up healthily and naturally. Rather than trying to speed ahead to quote unquote the end, because it's not the end, right? Anytime you get that somewhere, you realize, oh wait, there's more work to be done anyway. It's
never the end.
I love it, dude. This has been really, really, really fun. We have to do this again.
I would love to do another episode. I would love to do another episode in the future, because I feel like we just scratched the surface as far as something we get into.
We definitely, anytime we talk about something like this, we scratch the surface. But I guess, do you want to give I mean, you've mentioned a few times what you're doing with the Saturday school. People can find that. Is it via your website that's the best place to go? Just Trace Bell with 3 L's?
To sign up for the Saturday school, my dad's website's the best. So robbell.com, ROBBELL.com. And then for the discussion groups that we do afterwards, those are on my website, and he's putting a link to my website on his, so that'll be up. But my website, just to say it again, is tracebell.com, and that's Bell with 3 L's, so BELLL.com.
Perfect.
So that's where people can find me and him.
Awesome. And are you on social media? Are you out there doing stuff?
Same at for all those is Trace Bell I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Trace Bell with 3 L's for both those.
Cool. I'll make sure there's links to all that so people listening along can get on top of that.
Thank you so much.
Sweet. If you are deconstructing, there is no reason to do this alone. It can be an incredibly lonely process, but the deconstructionnetwork.com is a free resource to help you find others deconstructing in your local area. If you would like to support what I do, everything I do is for free, from talking to people for hours on end to producing resources and podcasts. It is only possible because people give generously. There's never any need to give. It will always be free, everything I do. But if you do, we do have an amazing private community group that we talk on over on Discord that you would gain access to. And we do regular audio and video chats on there as well. So it'd be great to see you in there. But of course, never any requirement. And of course, please, please, please come and talk to me on Instagram. I love connecting with people. I love helping people on their journey. If you need a safe space to process your deconstruction, I would love to connect. It's just at Phil Drysdale. Love every one of you. Peace.